so much, Paul, Mary. It's been such a pleasure to be part of this conference for the past few days, and I'm really happy to have a chance to sit up here with an incredible person, Leopoldo Lopez. Let me just introduce myself briefly. My name is Marie Berry. I'm a professor and a researcher. My research focus is on social movements, and I direct a Center for International Security and Diplomacy at the University of Denver with a strong focus on advancing research on prosperity, security, and social justice. And so a lot of the work that I do and that my researchers do and my team of other scholars and postdocs and students are doing is really thinking at the intersection of how we actually support movements for social change, what types of research is needed to really support the work that activists are doing at the front lines. And so it's just a privilege to be able to be here today with Leopoldo. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So I want to get us started actually by asking you, Leopoldo, to tell us a bit about your journey to this point. You have an incredibly prominent and difficult career as a politician in Venezuela, and I'd love to hear about those early days and what really kind of got you invested and interested in the work that you were doing.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the conference, to Farida, and to all of you for this. It's been very exciting to share with a lot of the people who are doing things to change the world, and the way to change the world is to do it from the bottom up, and that's what's happening here. So to tell very briefly my story, I am from Venezuela. I was born in the 1970s during a time when Venezuela was the most prosperous economy in Latin America, and it was a very strong democracy. Unfortunately, things changed for us. In my case, I had the opportunity to go abroad to study in the United States. I came back to Venezuela. I worked in the National Oil Company at the Office for Strategic Planning, and then I decided to run for office. This is when Chavez came to power in the end of the 1990s. I resigned from that job, ran for office, and lost. And then we started a movement to change politics in Venezuela. So I ran for the mayorship of the city of Caracas, and in the year 2000 I won. I was 27 by the time, and we had a very young, committed group of people that we wanted to change our municipality, and we actually did. We did many things when I was mayor. We built schools, we built healthcare centers, we changed the landscape, we changed the taxing format of the municipality, and it became a showcase of the things that could happen in the city. So in the year 2008, I was running for governorship of Caracas, and I was disqualified because we were going to win. No reasons to be disqualified, just because of political reasons. So at that time, I decided to put together a civil resistance, nonviolent movement all over Venezuela. And I went around all over my country, talking to young people, talking to community leaders, talking to union leaders, to put together a movement that will confront the dictatorship. So, making a long story short, of course, in the year 2014, we called for street protest against the dictator Nicolás Maduro. It was the first time that we were calling to people to the streets to present the dictator as a problem of the real suffering of the Venezuelan people. Up until that point, the Venezuelan people didn't think of what was happening in our country as a dictatorship, much less the international community. It was a bad democracy, a weak democracy, competitive autocracy, like many names given to what was happening, but it was not clear that we were living a dictatorship. So we called for the streets, and tens of thousands of people came out to the streets. The 12th of February, there was a young person, Basil da Costa, 20 years old, that was killed right next to me. And they charged the violence that was happening there, that was promoted by the regime, on us, the people that were organizing the protest. So that day, a warrant for my arrest came out. I went into hiding for some days. And then I took the decision to present myself voluntarily. Because the spirit of nonviolence is to show the scars of the system in order for people to be ready to change the system. And these are not my words. This is Martin Luther King talking from the prison of Birmingham in the 1960s. So showing the scars of the system was to present to the Venezuelan people and to the world that they were political prisoners and that they were willing to repress and to take people to prison. So in February 18th of 2014, I presented myself voluntarily. Tens of thousands of people were in the streets, everybody wearing white, everybody very committed to nonviolence, and I was taken to prison. So I spent the next 4 years in a military prison in solitary confinement, and I was sentenced to 14 years in prison.
Leopoldo, can you tell us, that sounds, I heard you tell us about this yesterday in the panel you were on, and 4 years in solitary confinement. Can you walk us through that a little bit? What was that like for you? How did that change you, and how did that kind of shape the work that you're doing today?
Well, I think that prison can either make you stronger or can make you weaker. And in our political party, we had like 500 people that went to prison. Many of my very close friends also went to prison. And I have seen kind of the human spectrum of how people can be affected. And I saw a lot of people becoming stronger. But I also saw how other people broke. I also saw how other people decided not to continue to fight for freedom. So prison is very difficult. But I had the opportunity to prepare myself because there was a warrant for my arrest 6 months before I was taken to prison. And that took me to read the experiences of people that had gone to prison. So I read a lot about Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, incredible book, incredible journey, incredible story. I read about Martin Luther King, about Gandhi, about the Venezuelan political prisoners, about a Catholic priest that was taken to prison in Vietnam by the communists. And all of their stories were very different, but all of them had something that was always present. If you're in prison, and particularly in solitary confinement, which is a condition that most political prisoners go to, you need to have a routine. So the key was to have a routine. So I thought a lot about this, and the night, I remember this night, kind of minute by minute, that I was taken to prison, when the locks were shut, when the lights were shut, when I was there after being, for months with hundreds of people in the streets, organizing people, protesting against the dictatorship. That all ended, and then I was in a cell by myself, thinking about this new reality that I was facing. And I knew that the entire realm of my fight was in my head. And it was the capacity to keep myself aligned with the purpose of fighting for freedom. So I started thinking about that routine, and I decided that I was going to do 3 things. Very simple. I was going to pray every day. I'm a Catholic, but like many Catholics, get baptized, we do First Communion, and you have that, but not very devoted to the day-to-day religion issues. But I had that in my background, so I knew that this was something that would give me a lot of strength. So I would do that. I would pray every day. Second, I would try to exercise my mind, reading, writing, drawing, trying to do something to exercise my mind. And I would do physical exercise. So I would do those 3 things with sport and discipline every single day while I was in solitary confinement. And for me, what was key was never to think about the day that I was going to be freed, because that can be your real prison in terms of time. So you are prison in terms of space, but you can be also in prison in terms of time if you think that the next week or the next month you're going to be freed. And if the next week and the next month comes and you're still in prison, that takes you to a situation of being depressed.
So I want to hear about how you ultimately got out of prison and are with us today, but I'm wondering if you can paint us a picture a little bit about what was happening for Venezuelans during that period of time.
Well,
there was a lot of shifts, right, between early movements in 2014 and then throughout the duration. As I said before,
Venezuela was the most prosperous economy, and it was a very strong democracy in terms of Latin American standards. Of course, with a lot of problems, with a lot of inequality, with a lot of poverty, with a lot of dysfunctional institutions. But it was a democracy, much better than the rest of Latin America. Unfortunately, the killing of the democracy in Venezuela, as is happening in many other places, it didn't happen from one day to another. I mean, it wasn't the traditional coup d'etat where, the military go take the presidential palace and you see people with guns in the streets and then things change from one day to another. No, that's not the way it happened in Venezuela. It happened in a in a period of time where Chavez was voted in. He had support of the people, but then immediately all of the institutional framework was abolished. It became more and more autocratic. They first went against the free press, then they went against the union leaders, then they went against the business community, then they went against the students, then they went against the politicians, and then when it was too late, it was already a dictatorship. So the consequences for the Venezuelan people were not only political. Unfortunately, that took us from being a prosperous country to becoming the poorest country in the region. So today, Venezuela, in terms of poverty, GDP per capita, humanitarian situation, it's only comparable to Haiti in the continent. So we went from being the most prosperous country to being the poorest country in a period of 20 years, having the largest reserves of oil in the planet. So Venezuela is a country that lives with a great potential of prosperity because of our natural resources, but because of mismanagement, as has happened here in Africa in many countries, it hasn't happened. So the country now is the country in the planet that has the highest level of migrants in the world. So Venezuela today has a migrant crisis that is above Ukraine, above Syria, without having a war. Unlike Ukraine, unlike Syria, where there is a war, in Venezuela, it was the war of the people in power against the people. It was the war of controlling the economy, destroying the economy, to a level where 2 years ago we had 25,000% of inflation. So that completely crumbled the national currency, and now the economy is dollarized, but we are living a humanitarian crisis where the Venezuelan people either have the choice of staying and remaining poor or looking to go outside our country and finding opportunities.
Yeah, I teach a class every year on gender, security, and human rights. And every year I have a whole unit on refugee and migration flows. And every year I update it with kind of the new lists, how many people are outside of their country of origin or of nationality. And it was jaw-dropping when I saw Venezuela actually surge to the top of that list. Because, again, most of the countries on that list are ones that have experienced active political conflict and crisis, Ukraine, Syria, and so forth. And yet Venezuela, I believe, has about 7 million refugees.
7.1 officially, but that number should, I'm sure it's 7.5, 8 million.
Without a war, which is incredible and very worrisome. And we know that food insecurity and inflation is really directly affecting so many people's lives in the country. I'm wondering if you could kind of place Venezuela into a broader global context right now, where we see this really, really repressive, authoritarian state, and the reverberations of that for ordinary Venezuelans. And of course, Venezuela is not the only country in the world, right, that is experiencing such kind of a swing to a decline of democracy.
Yeah, so as I was telling you, I spent 4 years in a military prison. Then they sent me to house arrest. Then I called for protest while being in house arrest. They sent me back to military prison. Then they sent me back to house arrest. In the year 2019, I was able to escape house arrest. And I spent the next year and a half at the Spanish embassy. And then I left Venezuela 2 years ago, and I started a different approach to the fight for freedom, because it became very clear to me that the struggle that we are facing in Venezuela is not just against Maduro. It's against a network of autocrats that have decided to promote and to sustain autocratic regimes all over the world. So for Venezuelans, it's very, very clear that the stronghold that Maduro has today on power is because of the support he has from China, from Russia, from Iran, from Belarus, from Cuba, And it's very, very clear to the regular Venezuelan citizen to talk about this because they've seen the way in which the China, Russia, Iran, they condition different areas of the state in Venezuela. It's either energy or finance or military or social control, but it's all linked to this international autocratic network. So I came out of Venezuela and started talking to my colleagues from Cuba and Nicaragua, that surprisingly, we're fighting the same fight, exactly the same. And we all know that if Cuba falls, Venezuela will be next, and Nicaragua will be next. We all have this idea very clearly, but we were completely disjointed. We were completely separated from each other. So we started talking to each other, and then I had the opportunity, because of the Oslo Freedom Forum and other forums, to meet other freedom fighters from Asia, from Africa, and it became very clear that it was the same struggle. So over the past year and a half, I've been meeting people from all over the world, talking about our struggle for freedom in our own countries, and what really struck me is that it was the same story. I hear the story from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, of how people confront power, how they go to prison, how they face the attacks on their family, on their movements, how they become targets of smear campaigns, how they become completely isolated from the financial system, and on and on and on. So it's the same story. So we decided, a group of freedom fighters and pro-democracy leaders from different parts of the world, to take on the challenge to build our own network of pro-democracy, pro-freedom movements. So that's what that's one of the things that I've been doing over the past year and a half, is to organize and to work with other people from Africa, from Latin America, Eastern Europe. And that's what brings me here. I mean, it's not just Bitcoin. It's talking to people who love freedom, people who want to fight for freedom, people who want to promote freedom in many different ways. So this is a global struggle. And it's very clear that the autocrats are working together. And now, for us, it's a challenge to bring together pro-democracy, pro-freedom movements to work together as well.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a global struggle. Freedom House, which documents the state of democracy in the world, has now measured a decline in democracy for each of the past 15 years, right? So this is an alarming trend, and the research and the scholarship is very, very convinced that there's no end in sight to this sort of democratic backsliding. And so I think what you're talking about in terms of corralling a counterforce, a counterweight to that of the autocratic bloc, is something that's incredibly powerful and important. My question is, how do we do this? How do we actually organize this counterweight? And what do we need for that fight?
Well, the first thing that we need is the will to fight. So I met an Iranian leader recently, and he was the world champ of wrestling. And he said something that struck very close to the attitude that we need to have. He said, I've been to many matches, and I've been many, many times to the wrestling mat. And I have won and I have lost. But what I can tell you is that I've never gone to the wrestling mat thinking that I was going to lose. I always went to the wrestling mat wanting to win. So that's the first thing, is wanting freedom. I mean, the most important thing is to have the attitude, to have the commitment that this is something worth doing. Because the conversation sometimes is very negative, as it is around Bitcoin, and we can talk about that, around democracy. So many times you hear what you just said, there is a democratic backsliding, there is a regression in democracy, autocrats are winning, the bad guys are winning, all of this negative framework of the problem. And we need to not talk as victims, but yes, we have been victims. My human rights have been violated, like many of my fellow citizens. I have been, and this is a case that we presented in the UNs, tortured by my regime. So I could sit here and talk about what we went through as victims, but that's not the conversation that we need to promote. We need to promote the conversation and the attitude of those who want to actually win the fight for freedom. So if you allow me, I have a video that is only two minutes. So Derek, if we can put the video, it's only 2 minutes, and this is a video about the World Liberty Congress, which is an initiative that we are putting together that started 3 weeks ago in Lithuania. We gathered 180 leaders from 44 countries with a commitment to bring ourselves together to promote freedom with very concrete, action-oriented initiatives. The World Liberty Congress is about bringing together like-minded people that are very different, but all over the world, there has been struggles for freedom, massive protests, tens of thousands of people. Today, we want that fight to be the fight of all.
Freedom fighters from every quarter of the world are now gathering in the capital of Lithuania.
The World Liberty Congress is about bringing together like-minded people that are very different, but we have the heart and our commitment in one word: freedom.
Tyrants are afraid of us. That's why they put us in prison or put us in exile. And we know for certain that together we are stronger.
It's very important to understand that violation of human rights anywhere is violation of human rights everywhere.
We are very happy to be here today to say never give up.
Let's fight for the people and especially the women in our region.
We have to destroy this friendship between dictatorship.
And that's why we are here. This is your conference and this is your Congress. The World Liberty Congress is all about you.
All these things will be useful in the years to come as we fight really what's a common enemy, which is the autocracies who've learned to work together, who share tools, who share information, who share tactics, and now we need to share things to fight back against them.
And now, having here activists from more than 40 countries, we are sending our message loud and clear to every dictator on the planet. Our time has come.
Unity will become a very important factor that will make us win.
We, the freedom fighters, are more united than dictators.
We need to have the attitude of those who have the eye of the tiger for freedom.
Dictators are fighting for power, but we are fighting for freedom, dignity, and democracy.
We are
Fighters
for freedom.
Freedom. Freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom. Freedom.
Freedom.
You know, I want to shout out to Lamar because you ended your presentation this morning, your keynote, with this really strong call that nobody is free until everybody is free. I am not free until everyone is free, right? And this recognition of the interconnectedness of our struggles, I think, is really powerful in what you're doing. And I want to connect it, right, to the conversations we've been having in this conference about Bitcoin. You and I have talked about how the same underlying structures that are fostering democratic decline and a rise in authoritarianism are very much linked to the same financial systems that have created kind of the reliance on a particular type of financial system and markets and the fiat, right? What I want to know is how we can use kind of the conversations in this room and that we've been having over the past 2.5 days to support this work of building a coalition of people standing on the side of freedom.
So yesterday we were talking about, where is the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency adoption happening at a fastest rate in the world. And this is very important that we all understand that it's happening in countries where there are high levels of inflation that happen to be countries that are autocratic. So there is a very clear correlation between inflation and autocracy. And those are the countries where there is the highest adoption of cryptocurrency. And why is that? Well, because people want to shield themselves from inflation and because people want to find ways to do transactions without the oversight and the control of the regimes. And it's very clear that these are tools for not millions, for billions of people in the world that today are either unbanked or if they are banked under autocratic regimes, like China, for example. and many other countries that people can be part of a financial system, but they are part of a system that has the continuous oversight and control and domination of the autocratic regimes. So all of this conversation that we've been having over the past 2 days, it's about freedom. So it's about the possibility of people to act freely. So what's the most massive mechanism of social control in autocratic regimes? It's economic dependence. That's the most important way in which autocrats have control of millions of people in their countries. They make them dependent. And the way they make them dependent many times is because of the currency. So if we are about financial freedom, it's kind of going around that dependency, but it's also about going to a higher stage, which is political freedom as well. So I think that if we think about freedom and financial freedom, that's one part of the conversation. But then we need to include the political freedom aspect. And if we understand the convergence between financial and political freedom, then we can start talking about a free society, about a freedom society. Because yes, you can have financial freedom, but if you don't have all of your rights respected and if you don't have political freedom, you will be limited in the type of freedom that you are having. So that's why we need to converge those who are in this financial freedom movement, giving people opportunities with those who are fighting for human rights, political freedoms. And that's how this is brought together. And it's very, very clear that it's part of the same conversation. It's our pieces of the same conversation that need to be locked in and understood as one single fight.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's really powerful. And you know, one thing that gives me a lot of hope is that we know and we've documented that in 2019, more countries and more people took to the streets than ever before in modern history, all around the world. More than 130 countries experienced protests against government. I mean, that is a massive, the United States had some of its biggest protests ever in history after the murder of George Floyd. There's been so many other examples of people who are fed up with the status quo and who are taking to the streets. That energy is something to build on, and the more we can connect these conversations, I think the more promising both of the priorities, but more promising all of the work will be. So, Leopoldo, I want to ask you, what are the concrete next steps? And if you could, for those activists and others that perhaps are a bit like Bitcoin skeptical, or nervous about what that would mean for their movements, what would you tell them in terms of why this is important?
Well, let me just give you an example of what we did. Yeah. It's not only about what can be done, it's what we've already done. We heard from Somalia, and we've heard many stories in the past couple of days of things that are happening. So in the case of Venezuela, 2020, COVID was happening, of course, we all know that, and we wanted to figure out ways in which to support medical doctors and nurses. And there were some funds that were seized from the dictatorship, and we were able to put together a program to send direct transfers to medical doctors and nurses. So we organized the verification of more than 70,000 medical doctors and nurses. We guaranteed that they were actually nurses, and we put together a mechanism with a stable coin to give them direct cash transfers. And what's important about this project is that it was approved by Treasury and OFAC. And also, it was very, very effective. It was super transparent, and it was directly to the people that needed the support. So we have that experience, and I've been finding in other countries that there are different ways in which people are organizing in order to promote financial freedom, to fight for political freedom. So in all countries that are autocratic, we need to figure out ways in which to build the internal capacity to face autocrats. So you asked me for next steps. So one of the things that we are doing is organizing what we are calling the Global Freedom Academy. And we want to train, hopefully, or moonshot, or view to where we want to get is train at least 1 million activists in 2 years' time with the tools, the content, the methodology of being effective community organizers and to being effective, nonviolent, civil resistance organizers. And that can be done. But that will need some technology to support these people, to support these pro-democracy movements. So how do you give direct transfers to people that are in this struggle, that have to dedicate their time, day in, day out, to the struggle for freedom? Well, this is a way that it can be done without the surveillance, without the blocking of the autocratic regimes. So this is a project that we are going to launch in Zambia in April of 2023. We will do the training of the first 200 trainers of trainers. So that's one project. The other project is to support political prisoners and their families. And one of the ways, one of the struggles that the families of political prisoners have is how can we support them from many people would like to help them from the US, from Europe, but they don't know how. So this is a way in which they can give them direct support to them, to their families, and to the struggle they're going through. Another project that we have is to do global advocacy together. It's not the same thing that I go to Europe, to the US, to different countries to talk about our struggle, than if we do it together. If we go, somebody from Latin America, somebody from Asia, somebody from Africa, somebody from Eastern Europe, and we say, this is what we're facing, this is what we need, it becomes a much stronger narrative, more compelling, and I think that we can get things done if we work together. So that's what we have in mind, and I would like to invite all of you to be part of this. This is, as Masih from Iran was saying in the video you just saw, the World Liberty Congress is about you. It's about people who want freedom. It's about people who are willing to take the step forward and say, I want to work together with other people from other countries to support them and to become one common struggle.
Love that. That's right. Yeah. We are almost out of time, but I just want you to end, I want to give you a chance to end by telling people what you think the stakes are.
Well, the stakes are very clear. It's either freedom or autocracy. It's either being free or being oppressed. And the stakes are very clear. And I think it's very clear that this continent today has a very large and deep presence of China, of Russia, in the ways in which they relate to many governments here in Africa. The same is happening in Latin America. So, or what's at stake is freedom, it's democracy. And we cannot only look for external help. I mean, it's not about, talking to other countries and say, hey, come and support us. We do need the support, but most importantly, we need the people who will have the capacity and the will to organize and to promote freedom and democracy. And I think that we have the tools to do that. And of course, cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is one of those tools. And I want to tell you an anecdote. This morning, I went surfing to a beach very close by. And after we went surfing, there were several people that were selling necklaces and elephants. And I said, we don't have cash. I said, can you pay with Bitcoin? And one guy said that he had Bitcoin, so we paid him. And the rest of the people that were there, they didn't have the wallet, and I am sure we're going to go this afternoon to surf again. And I am sure that this evening, when we go there, the 4 guys that will meet us in the beach, they will all have downloaded their app, and they will have become part of this new ecosystem because they have seen it directly. And this is the way. And this is the way things spread. It's creating networks. It's people seeing the magic that this is a way out of financial dependency. And that's what we want to promote. We want to promote the struggle for financial freedom, for political freedom, but my last message to you is for freedom at large. Don't only think about financial freedom. That is only part of the equation. We need political freedom. We need respect for human rights. We need free and fair elections. We need a free press. We need people that have the ownership of their rights. And the fight and the struggle for human rights in any corner of the world is the fight of all. As you said, Lamar, in your speech, we will not be free until everybody's free. That we might not see that in our lives, but we need to feel that committed and have the purpose that we are getting closer and closer to having a free humanity. And that's our struggle.
Cheers to that. Yeah. Straight Audre Lorde. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Leopoldo, thanks so much for this wonderful chat.